Well, David Cameron's had one photoshopped onto his website, and by the end of the week, thousands of people will be donning red poppies and joining in Remembrance Sunday events to commemorate those who died in battle during World War I.
The issue of whether or not to wear a red poppy can be divisive, and it seems the sentiment of commemorating the First World War may also be something not everyone agrees with.
The Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, is under fire for a video of him that's just emerged in which he suggested 2 years ago that there is nothing to commemorate about the war. He said it ahead of last year's 100th anniversary commemorations.
I think we should also remember that Keir Hardie, apart from being a great man in many, many, many ways, was a great opponent of the First World War. And next year the government is apparently proposing to spend shed loads of money commemorating the First World War. I'm not quite sure what there is to commemorate about the First World War other than the mass slaughter of millions of young men and women, mainly men, on the Western Front and all the other places. And it was a war of the declining empires.
Well, earlier tonight I spoke to General Lord Dannatt, who's the former Chief of General Staff and a member of the government's World War I Advisory Board, and Lindsey German from the Stop the War coalition, who didn't quite see eye to eye on the issue.
Remembrance Sunday and Remembrance Tide, as some people call it, at this time of year, is that we do remember what happened in the past. And I think when we're talking about the First World War, where this conversation began, I think what's really important to remember is that it was an absolutely disastrous war. Millions of people lost their lives. And it was pretty unnecessary, a complete failure of diplomacy at the time. And the key thing that makes it so important to study it is to make sure we understand what went wrong and to make absolutely sure these things could never happen again.
The problem is that's not what it says on war memorials, is it? There is a certain romanticism about it. It talks about heroism, it talks about sacrifice. Even the sort of elegant symbol of the red poppy is slightly romanticising the whole thing, isn't it?
There's an element of that, but I don't think that is the key point. I mean, I think if you lost a father, an uncle, a son, a brother in the First World War, you wanted to have some suitable memorial for them. And you don't want a great discourse on the war memorial about the rights and wrongs of the war. The young people went off to fight the war that they believed in, and they lost their lives, and that is worth commemorating it in a proper fashion. Whether that war was right, that's where you have to get under the skin of it and ask yourself the question, was it right, was it avoidable, did diplomacy fail? The answer is yes, all those things. It should have been done differently. Now you bring it forward to the present time, and it's absolutely right that we look very critically and very carefully at any armed intervention, any military conflict we get ourselves involved. But, I mean, make sure we're absolutely clear that it's the right thing to do.
Do you think the commemorations that we do ask those questions?
Not at all, and I'm very surprised that Lord Dannatt, as a representative of the military, or certainly in the past, is putting it in these ways, because you wouldn't get this impression if you looked at the various things that go on. For example, the arms companies are involved in many of these things. The arms companies, Lockheed Martin, for example, sponsored the Poppy Ball last year. These are things which very, very much play up the role of the military. Now, as people will be aware, most of the people who die in wars, certainly in the present, are not from the military. They're civilians of one sort or another. The people who are suffering from Afghanistan, from Syria today, the refugees, are by and large people who are civilians. And the Poppy Appeal has absolutely nothing to say to those.
Is that the wrong emphasis then? Should we be remembering civilians more?
Of course we should remember civilians, but don't let's forget that, just reflect, if you will, for a moment on the poppy installation at the Tower of London last year. 888,246 ceramic poppies. A great mass of poppies, a mass army. But actually each poppy represented a life lost and a family shattered. Even in the fighting, the effect was on civilians, on mothers, on wives, on girlfriends, on other family members. And of course, as the technology of war has developed, the Second World War saw mass casualties. Current wars see too many civilians losing their lives as well. So it's not just something to commemorate the military who lost their lives. We need to think much more widely, actually, as Lindsey is saying.
As I understand it, you're a pacifist, so you don't believe there's a just war.
I'm not a pacifist, and my parents were, obviously my father fought in the Second World War. I was of the generation...
So Stop the War is not pacifist?
No,
you do believe there
we
could be
oppose
just
the
wars?
wars that our government is involved in at present. We oppose the war on terror and the subsequent wars. That's what we were set up to do. So it's not a question of pacifism, but I think you do have to say, what is the justification for so many wars? Now, as I say, my parents thought the Second World War was a totally justified war and were certainly, I wouldn't say happy to be involved in it, were prepared to be involved in it.
You don't feel an urge to commemorate what they went through?
Of course I would commemorate them. I had an uncle who lost his leg at Nijmegen. I had my mother's first boyfriend who was shot down over Berlin. I mean, we knew that our generation knew the experience of war. Our parents knew it directly. I still had, in my primary school, we still had air raid shelters. So people, it was a very, very real experience growing up in London when I did in the 1950s and 60s. So it's not a question of saying these people shouldn't be remembered, shouldn't be valued for what they did. It's a question of saying, do we do it to justify future wars? And in particular, when we have the kind of situation now where we're still waiting for the Chilcot report, where the whole question of Iraq in particular is an extremely contested war, then surely we shouldn't just be having a situation where everybody puts a red poppy on, everybody says, it's fine, these things are okay, we're going to go ahead with these wars.
I mean, Lord Dannatt, we're talking about this partly because people have found some remarks that Jeremy Corbyn made about the Great War Remembrance a couple of years ago. Do you think his arrival at the head of the major opposition party as a potential Prime Minister has changed the tone of the public debate about all of this?
Well, it's certainly shaken things up in a number of areas. This debate is one. I think the nuclear debate's another one that he's shaken up. We haven't got time to go into that one. I have no difficulty at all about looking more closely at the reasons why we do things. But I'd just come back, I think, to 2 points. One I've made already, that we've got to look at the reasons for every war and make sure that in future, if we commit ourselves to armed intervention, we are completely sure it's the right thing to do. And just the last point I think I'd make is that the people that know most about war and least want to have another war are soldiers who have fought in a war. When you've had people shot around you, carried your dead comrades, actually, you don't want to go there again.
Which is exactly why my parents' generation, there was nowhere near the fuss about the poppy and about remembrance that there is today.
I mean, I'm just seeing on Stop the War Coalition, you got an item up here. It's that time of year when poppy fascism, in quotes, dominates UK public life. Do you think those are sentiments Jeremy Corbyn would share?
I doubt it. I doubt that he would share that language.
Do you share it?
I wouldn't use the term poppy fascism because I think it should be a choice whether people wear it. I certainly think it's wrong that people are more than encouraged in some areas, in some workplaces, in some schools and so on, to more or less have to wear the poppy. I think that's wrong. Some people wear a white poppy because they are pacifists and they want to remember the dead in that kind of way. And I think these should all be things that we discuss. I mean, I agree with Lord Dannatt. I think there should be a debate about why we had the First World War.
I mean, there is an element of that. When I was growing up, the newspapers didn't all put poppies on the front pages. People wore poppies for a shorter period around the 11th. Do you think it is going a bit far?
Well, there's no doubt that the focus on the remembrance period has increased. I think in part in the last 10 years it's actually been a movement by the general public to recognise our current servicemen who have been conducting operations in the name of the nation, in the name of the people in difficult places like Iraq and Afghanistan. Iraq, an unpopular war, Afghanistan, a largely misunderstood war. But putting those issues to one side, I think the British public, in a wonderful way, have got behind our service people, and that's been reflected in this remembrance period, particularly the 179 we lost in Iraq and 454 in Afghanistan. People want to say, yes, we remember, and they're saying thank you as well.
OK, thank you both very much indeed. Thank you.